the top predator of the seas. T-Rex was the top predator on land. But the T-Rex jaw was not descended from sharks at all. How did it happen? How did T-Rex get its bite? And how could one line of fish like these, with backbones and skeletons, but no bite to speak of, survive on land?
So the early fish, they were living in shallow water. Competition was probably intense for food. If you can gain food in new ways, that's always an advantage.
Harvard biologists Charles Marshall and Molly Markey study the strange transitional creatures that lived in shallow water 370 million years ago. They were fish, but they seemed to be on their way to becoming the world's first reptiles.
They had fins with fin tails on them. They had gills. And then their fins started to take on structures that enabled them to support their bodies on the bottom. And so it looks like they were beginning to locomote on the bottom using their proto-limbs.
Marshall's research reveals that these limbed creatures, called tetrapods, evolved jaws that were also more reptile than fish. This computer simulation, based on fossil skull measurements, shows the early tetrapod jaw in action.
They're biting, not sucking, which is really interesting. Fish, for the most part, suck. Because water is very viscous, it supports the food particles well. They open mouths rapidly, which pulls a column of water with the food in it into their mouths. It's possible these guys were acquiring food in a new way, which required biting in the water.
This basic life form combination, limbs, a skeleton, and a strong bite, set a successful pattern for many creatures to come, including us. Human beings still have the same form of jaw. 10 million years after they first emerged, tetrapods, having already evolved the biting jaw, were well suited to make the move on land. And once they made the move, their success was stunning. Fast forward 240 million years and thousands of species have inherited this new biting jaw. By the age of dinosaurs, survival is a bigger, faster, stronger game. Big-jawed meat-eaters on the offense, small-jawed herbivores on defense.
Carnivorous dinosaurs evolved better weapons for killing. More powerful jaws, teeth that were more effective for slicing through flesh, bigger claws, and so on. Herbivorous dinosaurs evolved defenses against carnivorous dinosaurs. Gigantic sizes, horns, spikes, or armor. In many ways, the age of dinosaurs can be thought of as an evolutionary arms race.
T-Rex certainly looks like the most ferocious jawbiter of all time. A typical T-Rex jawbone is 6 feet long, stuffed with up to 50 long, curved teeth at any one time. Like sharks, if those teeth broke off, T-Rex just grew them back. But a rising scientific theory says that T-Rex was really a wimp, whose arms were too short, legs were too slow, and eyes were too weak to bring down moving animals.
A few paleontologists have argued that Tyrannosaurus Rex was a scavenger rather than a hunter. These scientists envision Tyrannosaurus Rex not as the fierce hunter that we all grew up with, but rather wandering across the landscape, sniffing out dead carcasses, something like a 10,000-pound vulture.
Gregory Erickson is a paleobiologist and a champion of T-Rex. He is having none of it.
Tyrannosaurus Rex arguably was the most lethal terrestrial animal ever to have existed. It could easily bite through a bone like this.
Erickson first became involved in the T-Rex debate in the 1990s, when as a graduate student, he analyzed this rare find, a Triceratops pelvis riddled with exactly 58 bite marks. By matching casts of the indents to fossilized T-Rex teeth, he identified the biter as T-Rex. At first glance, the bite marks seemed to support the scavenger theory. T-Rex clearly took its time with this meal, nibbling the meat off the bone. But Erickson saw a chance to use the bite marks to establish a minimum bite force for T-Rex, and to prove that T-Rex's teeth could do more than just scratch a bone.
The teeth of Tyrannosaurus Rex really stand out among dinosaur teeth. This animal had the largest teeth of any dinosaur. This is the root, this is the crown. So over half of this tooth was actually usable by this animal. So we have 6 inches of tooth that they could work with. And they had a very interesting profile to them, reminiscent of, say, a steak knife or something like that. They even have the serrations on the front and the back. But this really isn't like a steak knife. If you look down at the end of the tooth, you see that it is much more rounded. It's shaped more like a railroad spike or a lethal banana even.
Erickson had the teeth. He had the bite marks. Now Erickson set out to recreate, for the first time anywhere, the actual bite of T-Rex. There were hurdles to overcome. How big would a tooth be that made the marks? Which tooth was it? And the trickiest question, how could he build a meaningful replica of a T-Rex tooth? Erickson took T-Rex's reptile status as a clue.
All reptile teeth are made of the same materials. They have an outer enamel shell, which is a really hard material. And inside that, the bulk of the tooth is dentine, which is a type of bone, essentially. And together, those two tissues act as a rigid body. Our replica here had to be as stiff and as hard as actual Tyrannosaur teeth. For the purposes of our experiment, we used bronze and aluminum. Bronze is a common casting material, and with the addition of aluminum, it made it a harder structure. So we had the size covered here. We also had the material properties.
Erickson fixed his T-Rex tooth to a hydraulic press. His plan? To measure precisely how much power it would take to make the half-inch divot seen in the Triceratops bone. A modern cow pelvis stands in for the prey.
The microstructure of cow pelvic bones are identical to the bones from Triceratops.
All right, reset the display scope.
Through trial and error,
0 force.
Erickson adjusts the torque until he finds a precise match for the power of the real-world bite.
Actuator off.
And running.
Fire away.
Fire.
Punch right through it, Paul. Man, you wouldn't want to get bitten by that. How much force, Paul?
About 3,000 pounds.
3,000 pounds.
Averaging many trials, Erickson's final result was 3,400 pounds of bite force, matching today's crocodiles for the most powerful jaws ever on Earth. And that's just a start.
Probably both sides of the dentition were engaged when this animal was biting too. So it's probably twice that much, which would put Tyrannosaurs as having bite forces at approximately twice that of a large alligator today. Doesn't mean the Tyrannosaur was biting at full force. I suspect that Tyrannosaurs could generate bite forces perhaps 3, 4, 5 times greater.
Erickson's work doesn't prove that T-Rex didn't occasionally scavenge, but it does show that this ferocious giant clearly had all the tools for the job of top predator. In the shadow of the dinosaurs, a different branch of the first creatures to crawl on land were evolving in their own way, with their own particular jaws and bite. When T-Rex and other big dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago, the mammals' time had come, and their bite would be our bite.
My family and I witnessed 3 red lights.
World order collapsed,